I admire bravery and loyalty, sir. You have both of these, but unfortunately, you haven't any brains at all. I hate fools. From the quote book. Highly recommend that. Come out, so there you go. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Crusade by David Whittaker. A pure historical four-parter with 2 episodes missing from the archives. Yes, this is actually a missing story, and if you open this up, you'll see it's nothing. There is nothing there, because I don't actually own this story because it's not out on DVD. I used the loose cannon reconstruction, which you can find on Daily Motion. So that's how I watched it. However, there are multiple ways of watching it, including listening to a CD rendition, reading the novelization, though I do know they do change some things. And yeah, just a few options out there, and some fan-made animations out there probably. But to The Crusade, one of the later ends of the historical era. This is also David Whittaker's first historical adventure. His last 2 adventures, The Edge of Destruction and The Rescue, they are both like really sci-fi pompous stuff. So here he tried to tackle historicals with a tale about King Richard of Lionheart and the Third Crusade, which, for those of you who don't know, in history, there was this whole religious battle between the Christians and I can't remember the religion of the other people. I think it's the Muslims. And here the story is about the battle between King Richard of Lionheart and the Sultan Saladin. And what I find really interesting about this story is that it's never played like one of them is better than the other. They both have their own positive and negatives about their personality. Like King Richard is played brilliantly by our guest star, Julian Glover. Yes, this is Julian Glover's first Doctor Who role. For those of you who don't know, Julian Glover is a brilliant, fantastic actor whose acting career spans years and years, and stuff like Star Wars, Indiana Jones and Game of Thrones, just to name a few. And this is actually one of his first big roles, and it's just, and he does a fantastic job here as King Richard. The story has them play it very Shakespearean, and Julian Glover being a Shakespearean actor, it really plays to his strengths. And you might not like the story, you might not like the historicals, but you cannot deny that he's a brilliant King Richard. But back to my point, King Richard is sometimes heroic, brave and thoughtful, but then sometimes he can be childish, demandish, and really controlling with his sister, who is played by Jean Marsh. Now, for Doctor Who fans, that name rings a bell because she's going to play a first Doctor companion later on as Sarah Kingdom, but we'll get to that when we get to that. But for now, she plays King Richard's sister. Now, here's a fun fact. William Hartnell had complaints about the script of this before it came out, because in history it suggested that King Richard had an incest relationship with his sister, and William Hartnell did not like that at all, thinking that it will ruin the family-friendly aspects of the show. So, thanks William Hartnell for not putting incest into our Doctor Who. Hooray! But yeah, that was King Richard, and Saladin. He's sometimes like he's calculating, and he kidnaps. He's not kidnaps. He holds people prisoner, but he's not a brute. He's actually quite charming and quite thoughtful as well, because when Barbara gets kidnapped, he treats her with respect, and his other people that he's captured, and they both sides of the parties want peace, but then both sides of the parties are in like this kind of like struggle. So it does a very good job ish on portraying both sides. Now, before we get into the actual story itself, we're going to have to explain that the guy who plays Saladin is a white actor in blackface, which, if you don't know what that is, years ago in films and TV, especially during the 40s and the 50s, there was an act called blackface where white actors would paint their skin dark so that they can play black characters. And this has now gone taboo. It's not acceptable. And the reason for it is that there's a huge amount of great actors who could have played this, who are the right skin colour. However, they didn't think that they were any good because of their and think that only a white actor could play it. So that's why that was done. It's a horrible thing, and this should not, whether you like the story or not, it should not put you into mind that this sort of practice is any good. Blackface was deemed terrible in the 60s and the 70s for good reason. So just keep that in mind, okay? I might like elements of this story, but that's not one of them. So onto the story itself. Like I said, it plays very Shakespearean-y with King Richard and this whole crusade. So if you're not into like that kind of like the way Shakespeare used to talk and stuff, you might not like this one. And like I said, it's a pure historical, so there's no giant monsters or villains or something like that. So if you're not into that kind of thing, I don't recommend this, but it is a great historical. So the TARDIS lands in a jungle whilst King Richard is fighting off some of Saladin's men, and him and his men get wounded and mostly killed, except for King Richard and another man who gets captured, who pretends to be King Richard so he can fool Saladin. And whilst this is happening, the Doctor and his team see this and they fight them. But Barbara gets kidnapped very early on, and it's come to this point where I've started to notice that Barbara, I've noticed for a while that she does have, like, always getting kidnapped and always getting treated how the women would be treated in these time periods, and always having the bad rubbish onto her. But it really doesn't work for this story. She in this story just seems like a damsel in distress, especially how, even though she's like this history teacher, and this should be where his greatest strengths lies. Like I said, some of the best stories are historicals. Like the Aztecs is phenomenal. The Marco Polo is brilliant. And Reign of Terror, that's a great one. But here she is just here as a damsel in distress, which I found really disappointing. Because she should have been one of the highlights of the story, especially how it actually deals with English history, and she could have had the mindset of which side was sort of like in the right or in the wrong, and if they're not both right or wrong, maybe she could explain it to Ian and the Doctor and Vicky, but we never get like scenes like that, and it is a massive shame. The Doctor, Vicky and Ian befriend King Richard to try and get Barbara back, and the dialogue here is very, very pompous and Shakespearean, but it feels like a grand historical epic. And I think a lot of people might find this disappointing, because it is very wordy. The story is mainly focused on its dialogue, which means that when we go to the missing episodes, episode 2 and 4 are missing. When we get to them, it doesn't feel like we're missing that much because the story is so heavily on the dialogue, which is okay, but it doesn't allow us to get a great grand screen in terms of camera directing, action. Though there are some great action scenes in this story, and just all the other elements. It's a very politically talkative storyline, and the Doctor and Ian and Vicky have to convince Sir Richard to let Ian out to have a party to go to Saladin and get Barbara back. And that's the start of it. King Richard comes off really childish, and he is like, no, we will not bargain with those savages, especially after he killed my mates. And that leads into one of our cliffhangers. But then later on, then he kind of goes along with it. And then this is something you might not know. He lets Ian go to get Barbara. But just before he goes, he says he has to have a title. So he gets Ian to go on his knees, and he gets Vicky to give him his sword. And he actually knights Ian. So Ian from now on is Sir Ian of Jaffa. I bet he was really chuffed at that, William Russell. I forgot to mention, if you get the loose cannon versions, there are actually inserts that they filmed with William Russell in which he speaks directly to the camera as Ian Chesterton, and he talks about like his adventures with the Doctor and stuff. It's really cool. You can find them on YouTube really easy. I highly recommend them. But anyway, back to the story. At this time, Vicky is dressed up like a boy because during that time women weren't treated that well, and so the Doctor decides to treat her as a boy throughout the story. But to do this, he needs to get clothes. Now, instead of having go into the Doctor's big wardrobe, which I found really odd, he actually steals clothes. He justifies it by saying that the clothes that he'd taken were already stolen, so it's less. So it's like if they've been stolen before, they can be stolen again. And he uses the word borrows, which is something a lot of later Doctors would say strongly about the Doctor's characters, that when he steals something, but he calls it borrowing, and he justifies that in his mind. So it's very unusual that the Doctor would try and would actually steal anything. So that's very interesting for this story. But then back to Barbara. Now Barbara is sent to, she befriends the man that she was kidnapped with, the guy who pretended to be King Richard's, who is, I believe, William, I can't remember his name, William something. And they two get on very well, and it's nice to see Barbara having a lot of getting along with someone so quickly and not being bloody attacked all the time. And even when she meets up with Saladin, he comes off as a very nice and generous person, and when one of his men is like, we should torture them and treat them like enemies, he actually asks Barbara what she thinks, and after she says it's like this is punishment, it seems like a punishment for fools, he actually says that despite not giving them their freedom to leave, he'll treat them like guests. So not a very stereotypical Eastern way of portraying these sort of characters. A lot of like history, especially historian epics around the 60s and the 50s in television and movies always portray them as very stereotypical barbarians. But here they actually did a very good job writing them as a bunch of people, both good and bad. So, that's actually really cool. However, Barbara seems after this moment, and you think her scenes do kind of drag. She doesn't really do anything herself, and it's more the plot carrying her around to different places. Like, for example, one of the characters hears that the guy who was questioning, who wanted her basically to be tortured, is planning on taking her and killing her himself. And this woman then tells Barbara, and even though Barbara already knows that there's like a conspiracy to get her, she goes off with this guy called Luigi, and gets kidnapped by him. So she gets kidnapped twice in the story, which is really disappointing. So yeah, Barbara's scenes in this are very... She gets kidnapped and she needs to be rescued. And she doesn't do anything strength or character or thematic-wise that will make the story more interesting. So let's go back to the Doctor and Vicky for a second. Now, they have a little giggle to themselves because later on, the guy who they stole the clothes from, he points them out with the guy who he stole the clothes from, and then the Doctor kind of like outwits them, and we get like a really funny scene of them basically being outwitted by the Doctor, and him and Vicky have a bit of a laugh. And like I said, William Hartnell and Mara O'Brien do a fantastic job, and they're just so lovable, and you can see that the chemistry between them is just spot on. But the characters don't really get tested anywhere, and thematically it's a bit of there's nothing really there thematically. For example, there's this whole thing about her dressing up like a boy, and she questions the Doctor. It's like, why'd she got to dress up like a boy? And the Doctor points out it's like to protect her and stuff, and she feels a bit disappointed about that, and you can see that she started to kind of resist the Doctor. But however, nothing like that actually happens, as later on they get spotted out by King Richard's sister, and later on and then she asks for everybody to treat her like a girl, like because she is a girl. And so that plot point, though very interesting, it would have been nice to see what they would have done, just kind of goes nowhere. So that's kind of a disappointment. And Ian's adventures with him on the search, he goes to Saladin quite easily, I'd like to add, and finds out that Barbara's been taken, and so he goes on a quest to find her. And he gets captured by... Whilst he's fallen asleep, he gets captured by this man who ties him up. And this other guy basically brags, trying to take his money away from him. So Ian gets tied up and left for dead before this guy finds him and tries to take his money off him. But Ian outsmarts him and gets out. And actually befriends this guy. This guy, he's only in it for a short while, maybe like at the end of part 3 and then part 4. But him and William Russell are very... I love these two characters together. It's only a short amount of time, but I really like the interactions between these two. This guy, he's like a thief, and he's kind of like a low life. But after helping Ian, he kind of like redeems himself. And after Ian gives him money, he kind of like befriends, makes a great ally out of Ian. So I really like that element, even though it is very short. And Barbara, she befriends this man and this woman who was one of the man's daughters was kidnapped and forced to be the guy that tried to kill Barbara's wife, I think. I can't remember. But yeah, they are very nice characters, and there's a great bit where Barbara and the girl have to hide from the guards, and the guards are like, we'll burn this place down. And so what Barbara does is she lets the girl hide in the room, and she kind of comes out and reveals herself hide in, which means yes, she gets kidnapped yet again, third time in one story, but it does kind of show that she would put like situations into her own hand, and she's not afraid to stand up against evil when it arrives, and to protect that little girl. So that was a good scene, even though it does show Barbara getting kidnapped again. But then after that, Ian saves Barbara, and they head off to Jaffa to collect everything. And there's a great bit then with King Richard where he says he's desperate to get back to Jerusalem, and the doctor tells him that one day he will. And you think, right, he must know then that, like, history, he must go to Jerusalem. Then he turns to Vicky and he's like, he'll never see Jerusalem. History says that he'll never get there, and thing. And then Vicky is like, oh, that's a real shame. Can we not tell him? And the doctor's like, no, history must run its course. So that was a very great way to end that. And so they leave. However, when they get near the TARDIS, they get captured by some of King Richard's men who think that he's some sort of like traitor. And whilst this happens, Ian spots this, and he comes to everybody and he says, you found my man, you found the guy who I've been searching for. I must have the responsibility of killing him myself, of executing him myself. And they let Ian in let the doctor to Ian, and then they escape through the TARDIS. So a lot of like how clever they're in. So yeah, I think as you may have noticed throughout my discussion of this video, our companion crews are just sort of like in the background whilst we have the story of King Richard, Saladin. And I think with the way this story is structured, the more historical characters are much more interesting and much more dynamic than our actual characters that we follow through, which is a common complaint about most of the historicals, is that it's basically just our main characters observing the better story. So, but this story does have that complaint. However, it is a great listen / watch. I don't think it's for everyone. If you are planning on skipping this, I think it's fair enough, especially if you're not interested in listening to the missing episodes. But if you are interested in historicals and just seeing something unlike like a newest Doctor Who, and have something with a bit more story to it rather than like our companions having like an epic adventure, then maybe the story is for you. I personally, I liked it. I think it could have been better, but it could have been a lot worse. And to see, even though, like I've said, the guy who plays Saladin is in blackface, and that's not a good thing. Written wise, the character is written well, and not much offence should be taken written wise. Does that sound like I'm justifying it? I hope not. We should not be able to justify blackface, okay? But yeah, The Crusade by David Whittaker. Probably, in my opinion, so far, it's David Whittaker's weakest story. It is nice to see him trying something different, but there you go. Oh, and Julian Glover. Just watch it for Julian Glover, for Christ. Just to see where he got his big break. In Doctor Who, no less. Is just fantastic. So, just watch it for Julian Glover. His performance in this is just perfect. So join me next time where we go to the Space Museum, and we have another story in which it has a bit of a reputation. So I'll see you then for the Space Museum. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.